others who are suffering. Help me to be a voice for those who cannot speak, an eye for those who cannot see, an ear for those who cannot hear. Above all, let me be a heart of love and care in a world full of prejudice and hatred. Let me be a source of light for those who are burdened by darkness. Lead me in my walk with you to discover my calling and vocation in this world. Chapter 6. Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. Frequently I meet people who are surprised to learn that Christians still live in the Middle East. Some believe Islam has completely replaced Christianity. Others assume that today's Arab Christians are the product of relatively recent missionary activity to Arab Muslims. Yet the Christian church was born in this region, in notable ancient cities such as Jerusalem, Samaria, Damascus, Antioch, Alexandria, and their surrounding towns and villages. Christian communities here can trace their roots back to the disciples of Jesus and the day of Pentecost. In the Middle Eastern mentality, the sense of time differs from that of Westerners. All the centuries coexist and directly affect us today. The story of Veronica did not originate with us. It does not appear in any of the Gospels, but arose centuries later as a Roman Catholic Western tradition, linked with a veil with which a woman named Veronica is said to have wiped the sweaty, blood-streaked face of Jesus, and which thereafter bore his imprint. Yet though Veronica is a legend, the compassion she embodies is real and compelling, and the sixth station of the cross invites us to consider its loving nature and how well we ourselves reflect it. Cross icon, the sixth station. Continuing up the steps from Station 5, you will see on your left a green door flanked by two big, square stone slabs. This house dates back to the 13th century, making it almost 700 years old, yet people still live in it. Farther along, beyond an overhead arch, on your left are two arched doors. The first is overlaid with black iron trusses, and the second is blue, and between them, an ancient pillar embedded in the wall bears a Latin inscription with the name Veronica. Tradition has it that here is where Veronica wiped Jesus' face with her veil. The symbolic name Veronica, which combines the Latin words verus, meaning true, and icon, meaning image, implies that the image of Jesus' face purportedly imprinted on the veil is an authentic icon. Hence the piece of cloth known as the Veil of Veronica became revered by Roman Catholics. The incident is derived from Luke chapter 23 verse 27, which says that a large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. NIV. To the left of the pillar, the front door of the small chapel of the Holy Face is usually closed. I always ask the nun for permission to take my group inside. The interior is small and cave-like, lit by just a few candles, with a simple stone altar. It is a haven of tranquility compared to the busy street outside. A stone plaque commemorates the visit by Pope Paul VI in 1964. Built in 1882, the chapel belongs to the Order of Little Sisters of Jesus. During its construction, the remains of two monasteries were discovered. One was a section of the chapel of the Crusader Monastery of St. Cosmos, known to have existed in Jerusalem between AD 546 and 563. Also found there were the apparent remains of the monastery of St. Damian. Saints Cosmos and Damian were brothers, born in Arabia and martyred during the persecutions of the Roman Emperor Diocletian's reign. We know that they were physicians and early church fathers who later became patron saints. The chapel was completely restored and refurbished by Antonio Barluzzi in 1953, including its Crusader arches, and below it is an unlit Crusader crypt. The blue door on the right of the pillar opens into a shop run by the Little Sisters of Jesus, who sell icons. The story of Veronica is told not in the Gospels, but in early non-canonical writings. A 2nd century version of the Acts of Pilate says that Veronica, Bernice in the Greek story, was the same woman whom Jesus had healed of a blood disorder, Matthew chapter 9 verses 20 to 22, and that she came to his trial to assert his innocence. Later 4th and 5th century versions say that Veronica possessed a cloth imprinted with the face of Jesus. Western pilgrims carried the story back to Europe. As the Stations of the Cross developed in late medieval times, Veronica was remembered for wiping the face of Jesus and for having his image on her veil. A healing relic with an image of Jesus' face came to be known as Veronica's veil, or the sudarium, sweat cloth, and was venerated in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome as early as the 8th century. Heart icon. Insights for your heart. The scriptures never provide a physical description of Jesus. However, they do tell us there was nothing about his looks or his station in life that drew people to him naturally. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Isaiah chapter 53 verses 2 to 3, NIV. At the 6th station, we encounter Jesus at the culmination of his rejection by the Jewish leaders, mocked and jostled by the soldiers, struggling toward Golgotha. Amid the crowd, one woman watches and, moved with compassion, decides to do what she can to ease his suffering. Stepping forth from the sideline, Veronica takes her veil and with it wipes the sweaty, grimy, blood-caked face of Jesus. It is a small gesture, over in a moment, but what might it have meant to Jesus? Amid the cruelty of the soldiers, kindness. Amid the unrelenting harshness, a tender hand wiping away the filth, and loving eyes gazing into his own. One small act of consequence, one person who did not despise or reject him, one heart that cared. Perhaps Veronica knew Jesus. Perhaps she had once sat listening to his words, and now they echoed in her heart. We can say at least this much, that Veronica reflects a heart that showed compassion to a man when no one else would. Simon of Cyrene served Jesus by bearing his heavy cross over part of the journey to Golgotha. Veronica, in contrast, stepped forth in a moment with a soft, light cloth and wiped the blood and sweat from Jesus' face. We need both kinds of help and care in our own life, practical, load-bearing help, but also quick, empowering doses of kindness, perhaps just a brief prayer or a simple word of encouragement right when we need it most. Book icon. Marie, my Veronica. The girl walking past my vehicle was beautiful like an angel, and the best part was I knew her. Well, kind of. It was 10:15 on a calm evening in November 2005, and I was about to park my car in the Christ Church compound at Jaffa Gate after attending a family obligation with my mother. The two of us would then walk together to our home in the Christian Quarter. I honked the horn for the night staff to open the black wrought iron gate, and that's when she stepped through and walked past my old Mercedes. Oh my! Impulsively, I jumped out of the car. "Marie!" I shouted. "Marie! Marie!" At the third shout, she looked back. Who was this crazy man yelling her name while a nice lady sat calmly in his car? Then she recognized me as part of the staff in Christ Church. I myself had heard about her because she was a volunteer there, but we had never had an opportunity to talk. As a gentleman, I offered her a ride home, and she accepted. I jumped, smiling, into my car and told my mother that she would have to walk the short distance to our house by herself because I had to drive the new volunteer to her manager's house, where she was staying. My mother walked home alone through the Christian Quarter, wondering why her son had abandoned her to give a ride to some strange volunteer. I told Marie it was not a good idea for an American girl to walk alone in the dark from Jaffa Gate all the way to the Arnona neighborhood, a walk of at least 30 minutes. And I knew. I had just met my future wife. This was the woman I wanted to share my dreams and life with. Of course, I never told her so. She'd have thought I was crazy. But I felt the presence of the Holy Spirit so strongly that at one point I almost stopped the car. I dropped Marie off safely and returned, rejoicing, to the old city. I explained to my mother what had happened, and that night I slept very well. An American girl comes to Israel. When my beloved wife, Marie Hauenstein Mubarak, first came to Jerusalem, she knew nothing of Palestinian Arab Christians. She was raised in a small town in southern Maryland among quiet forests and farms on the western shore of Chesapeake Bay. The eldest child of an Episcopal pastor, she grew up in the rectory of the church where her father served. Her home in rural Calvert County was surrounded by graveyards, and her friends refused to play with her there because they thought the area was haunted. Not surprisingly, Marie had a vivid imagination and a heightened awareness of the spiritual realm, and she was fearful of many things. But although Marie's upbringing was the opposite of mine, which was marked by the bustle and chaos of Jerusalem's cosmopolitan Old City, our childhoods had at least one thing in common. From the time she was 3 years old, Marie was taking people on tour. She would ask the young adults attending her family's home Bible study if they would like to buy a ticket to see her room. No money ever changed hands, of course, but the tour part was real. Marie would show her tourists her toys, books, and other important items. Later, during her family's vacations in Texas, Marie would take the lead, making an itinerary of all their favorite things to do and places to see. She loved to sit in the front seat with the map, helping her dad navigate and looking for good places to stop, and she kept a journal of each day. Despite her fears in the post-9/11 world, God began to draw Marie to the Middle East even as he drew her closer to himself. In January 2002, during the Second Intifada, she visited Israel with her father to see what was happening at the epicenter of the conflict in Jerusalem. She stayed at the Christ Church guest house for 3 days and nights, not knowing that her future husband was working there and living just a few blocks away. Unimpressed by Israel, Marie returned to her daily life in the United States. But she struggled to relate to friends and coworkers who were woefully ignorant about the Middle East and its peoples. After 9 months of listening to their rantings, Marie decided to obtain a degree in secondary education so she could teach world social studies to high school students. She wanted to raise teenagers' awareness of other cultures so they could become better citizens of the world. Marie studied every world religion and culture and their regional histories, but none of them offered absolute truth or peace. Their conflicting philosophies had instead resulted in many wars over the centuries across the globe. Overwhelmed, Marie finally stepped away from the university for a season in order to hear God's voice and find healing for her soul. In a quiet seaside town in April 2005, she privately dedicated herself to following Jesus without reserve, wherever and however he would lead her, and waited for his instructions about what to do next. 1 month prior, Marie had a remarkable epiphany. In an audible voice, God told her that she was destined to take people on field trips that would change their lives. She held on to that promise, not knowing how much she would have to sacrifice in order to follow God's calling on her life. The very same evening that Marie committed her life to Jesus more deeply, her parents received a phone call from a ministry in Israel. There was a need. Could Marie's father recommend someone who might fill it? Yes, he could. The position fit Marie beautifully. With uncanny swiftness, a door had opened for Marie, a door back to Jerusalem and her destiny. Love blossoms in Jerusalem. A couple days after I drove Marie home, our paths crossed again at the Heritage Center Museum where I worked. Marie was taking a break from her own job, wandering around drinking a cup of coffee. She was walking down the museum steps, admiring the reflections of her pretty colored shoes off the polished stone, when I called her name. She was happy to see me. I asked her to join me for her coffee break and tell me her story.